Hey my friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm so excited that you're here today. We are going to talk about setting up a limited watercolor palette. So I chose just 8 colors and I'm going to talk to you about why I chose those 8 colors, why I think these are the only 8 colors you really need. We're going to talk about some color mixing. We're going to talk about the difference between paint pans, like the little sets you can buy, versus tube paints, why I prefer tube paints. We're going to talk about the type of palettes you can use, why I like the one I use, and you know, some of it is going to get a little bit maybe in the weeds a tiny bit. If it goes over your head, just let it go, catch what you can. I know there's going to be some really great tips and insights for you. So if you're ready, let's jump in. All right, my friends, ask and you shall receive. We are going to go in depth with setting up a limited palette. So let's talk really quick. What is a limited palette? So limited palette is just a small, sort of like really curated, intentional set of colors. We're not going to use that many. You can kind of think of it as like your capsule wardrobe for the fashionistas out there. You just are choosing the simplest colors that you need, and then you mix and match. In fact, I have a couple on here that are actually not included in the limited palette that I'm showing you today. So let me just show you here real quick. So, and before I show you real quick, let me just say something. Why I choose a limited palette, why I try to use a limited palette. I will say that sometimes I start wanting all the extra easy mixed colors. I think it's so important to know how to mix. When you have limited colors, it's going to help you learn how to mix colors really well. It's going to make your paintings really harmonious because, you know, the green you're mixing in your blue is also the same, sorry, the yellow you're mixing in the blue is also the yellow you're probably mixing in your red. So those colors are just going to be kind of threaded throughout your artwork. So, and I think the most important reason is you just don't need all the colors. It's a distraction. I think if you have limited colors, you know how to mix them well, you're going to be a better painter. There's a lie that we believe that we need all of the colors. I am talking to myself. I have a drawer full of colors that I don't use when I could have mixed colors to get to those colors all along. So that's enough of an intro. Let's get into it here. So before I show you the paint colors, I'll just show you what I typically use. So I use tube paints, okay? So this is wet paint. I squeeze it out into these little wells. I use a metal Holbein palette. This is kind of my everyday daily use palette. I like this one especially for tutorials. It just fits in the frame really well. There's a good amount of space for mixing, which is very, very important to me. I need as much mixing room as possible. Why else do I like this one? It's lightweight, it's compact, it closes, I can take it with me places. You could use a plastic one, you could use ceramic, which is not great for traveling, but it's beautiful. I like the metal one. I don't know, there's just something about it. It works for me. So the difference between tubes and pans, wow, this is seen better days. I've used this so much in the past, like back in the late 2010s, probably 2016, 17. I used this quite a bit. But I will say that I'm much more inclined to use this. I just feel like there's a little more room for your brush. You kind of like gotta like really dip your bristles into paint wells, and I feel like that kind of damages bristles to always be like vertically poking downward, if that makes sense. So for example, when I get paint here, you know, my hand is just sideways. It doesn't feel like I'm just doing this straight down into the paints. So that's one reason I don't love it. There's not as much room for like quickly pulling colors and mixing them together. Just a little bit more distance you have to travel, not that big a deal. These are really cool. You get to experiment with a lot of different colors. But again, I don't believe you need a lot of colors. So I think these are unnecessary. Okay, so let me tell you about my limited palette. And I just want you guys to know I agonized over this decision. In fact, I filmed this video twice because the first selection, I just realized there was a color in there that didn't need to be in there, and there was one color that should have been in there that wasn't. And I will also say there's no perfect limited palette, except for this one. But besides this one, there's no perfect palette. No, I'm kidding. There really is no perfect palette. Whatever colors you choose, you know, I would rather you commit to the wrong limited palette than half commit to the perfect one. Like whatever palette you have, whatever you're using, just use it. You know, use the paints you have, practice with them, get comfortable with them, just use them, okay? But if you do want the perfect palette, here it is, okay? So first, we have a cool red. This is Quinacridone Red. Next, we have a warm red. I'm using this color called Sennelier Red. You could also use Winsor Red. There's other reds. I'm gonna add in the description of this video a list of alternative paints you could use that would work just as well. After that, I'll mention this one. This is an earth shade, okay? So the other ones I'm using are all called synthetic shades, okay? So these are all like lab-made paints. Burnt Sienna is an earth shade, so it's made from earth pigments, I guess like crushed up rocks. When you see it, you'll get it. Up next is my cool yellow, Winsor Lemon. After that is my warm yellow, Indian yellow. I'm going to talk more about warm and cool, don't worry. I'm just showing you them really quick. And then we have raw sienna, which is another earth shade. Beautiful, beautiful yellow color. And then we have two more. We have Winsor Blue, my cool blue, and then Ultramarine, my warm blue. An honorable mention here. I like to have white gouache. Sometimes if you want to add a little bit of highlight to a painting, if you want to thicken up a painting, gouache is great. We're going to talk a little bit more about transparency versus opacity later, but let me just tell you really quick. And I'm going to start getting some colors mixed here. We're going to do little swatches of all 8 of those colors. And I'm going to tell you about my preference for paint. So my qualifications is that my paints be 3 things. So transparent, or at least mostly transparent. Transparent means that you can see through them. Opaque means it like blocks what's underneath it. So oil paints, acrylic paints, gouache paints, when you paint on them, you're covering what's underneath. Whereas with watercolor paints, the white of the paper still shines through unless you do like a ton of layers. And when you layer 2 colors on top of each other, you're not going to be covering the color underneath, you're going to be adding to it. So for example, if you lay down yellow, you let it dry, then you lay down some blue on top of it, it's not going to be blue, it's going to be green, okay? So that makes sense, that's transparency. So that's what I look for in my watercolor paints. So this here is Quinacridone Red. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a darker swatch. I'm going to dip my brush in water, and then I think just next to it, I'll do a little lighter, just so we can see like the lighter value version. So it's the exact same color, just a darker value and a lighter value. I have 2 glasses of water here, one for dirty water, so I'll clean off my brush consistently in one, and then I dip it in the other one for fresh clean water. When we're mixing colors, when we're doing something like this, you really want your colors to be as clean as possible. So next, my warm red, my warmer red. So you'll notice that Quinacridone leans a little bit more towards like a purple violet red, subtly. It's a little more pink. So Sennelier or Winsor Red, if you just saw it on its own, you would just think, oh, that's red. And you would be right. But when you see it next to this one, you see, oh yeah, that is a little bit warmer. Make sure this is nicely in frame here. Okay, dipping my brush in water just to dilute the color, drop some of that color into the water. And now I have a lighter version. wanting to sneak back up there. So I'm just gonna blot it with my towel here. So there we have it. My 2 reds. And I'm gonna take some notes here as we go. Okay, so next one. We're gonna start doing some yellows. So the next thing I want you to know that I look for in my paints. I look for paints that are lightfast, which means that they are gonna last. Some paint colors are called fugitive colors, and that means that when they are in the sun for extended periods of time, they will like change color or lose their intensity. We don't want that. We want something that's gonna last for generations. We want the highest quality we can. So I am a big believer in choosing lightfast paints. In fact, the color that I used for many years for my yellows was, my cool yellows was not lightfast, which is why I switched to Winsor Lemon. Another thing I want to point out with Winsor Lemon, notice just how light it is in my palette compared to all these other paints. It's so light, which means that when you see it in the well, that's the darkest it's ever going to be in the paint wells here. Whatever you see is the darkest you're ever going to be able to get it on paper. And that is a very light value. So that means that's as dark as I can get it. Okay? I can get it lighter than that, but I can't get it darker than that. Okay, and then here's my light watery version of Winsor Lemon. So that's my cool yellow. You might think that sounds funny because all yellows are warm. You would also be right about that. But let me show you what Indian yellow, which is a more warm golden yellow with a little more, so this one has a little more orange in it. Winsor Lemon technically actually pushes a little bit towards green. I know it's so subtle, it's hard to tell, but it does. So see how much warmer this one is? You see that there's a little more orange in there. Diluting it and then dropping my lighter. Little moment right there. Okay, so I'll write that down. If you're interested in learning something gross and cool, look up how Indian yellow paint used to be made. I am not remembering the exact details and I don't want to say it, but look it up. It's very interesting. This Indian yellow is not made in the old ways. It's made, these are all synthetic colors. Okay, next we're going to do raw sienna, which is this beautiful warm earth color. Raw sienna is a beautiful, beautiful earth shade. This one's great for like skin tones. It's beautiful for adding to colors to kind of lower their intensity, just make them a little bit more muted. So there's a stronger value of raw sienna, and then here's a light shade. I love this color. And then let's bounce back to this color here. Truthfully, sometimes I'm not quite sure where to put my earth shades in relation to my synthetic colors. My synthetic colors are very bright, very like full of saturation, you know, that very intense color. Whereas the earth shades are more subdued, more subtle. So I kind of just, as you notice here, I keep, you know, here's my like reds. I just keep this one next to my reds, and then I keep raw sienna next to my yellows. Okay, so here's burnt sienna, one of the most popular paint colors of all time. I would say that most watercolor artists, most painters in general, have burnt sienna. I think that's one of the most popular colors, and it deserves it. It's a great color. Adds so much warmth, adds so much nuance to colors, to color mixes. So raw sienna, burnt sienna, as you can see, very different values, right? So that burnt sienna, you can see here on my palette, it gets very dark. It can get very dark. And raw sienna, much lighter. So let's do our blues, okay? So we'll start with Winsor Blue green shade. Winsor Blue green shade. So this is going to be the warmer of our two blues. it's hard to tell the difference between a warm blue and a cool blue. If you find that to be the case for your eyes, you're not alone. I think it's kind of hard to tell. Sometimes you kind of only know in relationship to each other when you see them next to each other. Sometimes you can really only tell because of color mixes, and we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so they're such striking colors, aren't they? They're just so, they are so intense when you just see them right out of the tube like this. I very, very rarely just use them out of the tube. Once in a great while, but generally I like to do some color mixing. So this is the palette here, guys. This is 8 colors. And you can do pretty much anything in the world with these colors right here. Sometimes it's really fun to have colors like here. I love green gold. I have indigo here, which is kind of like a muted earthy blue color. Sometimes it's just fun to have those colors that you just love. You just want to reach into those all the time. And that's totally fine. I think this is a really great place to get started. You can get green gold, you can get indigo, you can get lavender, you can get all these other perylene green, all these wonderful other colors. You can get them by mixing these ones. So let's do a little color wheel here. So I'm going to start by, I'm going to use a clean brush here. And we're going to do something fun up here. Just using a damp brush. I'm going to wet this circle up here. And I want to do just like some like what I've already done here, but I want to just let the colors bleed into each other a little bit so we can start to see how they interact one to the next, okay? So I will probably zip through this part. I think I've said all I need to say about the colors themselves. But we'll talk as soon as I finish this part. Okay, there we have it. So you can see that the paints are wanting to do some funny things. They're both wanting to wrap around the top. That's because this is a wet on wet application, so you never know exactly how the water is gonna take that paint and move it, but that's kind of part of the fun. So let's talk about it here real quick. So Quinacridone Red, it's more of that like purplish cool red, and next to Ultramarine Blue, which is our cooler, our warmer blue. You can see it's starting to turn like a little bit more of like a purple in there. Sennelier Red next to Winsor Lemon. You see that in between those two, we're seeing like that orange moving over towards warm Indian yellow, towards cooler Winsor Blue. So you'll see that those are interacting together, giving us a little bit of a green color. So it's kind of a fun way to do a little color wheel there. And that is so funny that that's just like, but that's okay. I'm gonna let it do it. So I will also talk real quick about how I set up my colors here. So just notice it's basically just the color of the rainbow, right? I start warmest to coolest. Easy enough, right? And I always group them like cool, warm, cool, warm, cool, warm. And then I just have my earth shades mixed in there. Okay, so let's do some color mixing. This is going to be the fun part of this video. I'm going to show you 3 different kind of like groupings of colors. So first we'll start with some like very fresh, very clear mixes, okay? These are going to be very bright, beautiful. And then we're going to do some more like natural, balanced, not quite as like intense as these ones. And then at the bottom, we'll do the more like desaturated, earthy, muted tones. So that's when we're going to really start bringing in our earth shades. So I'm going to do like maybe 5 or 6 mixes on each, and I will write down the ratios as well. So let's see here. So getting started with our mixes here. So we're going to start with a beautiful kind of like rose color, maybe something that leans a little bit more like coral. So let's do some Winsor Red. and we'll do a little bit of Indian yellow. So we'll say that this is going to be like 2 parts Winsor Red or Sennelier Red. Winsor Red is also what it's called, so Winsor Red, Sennelier Red, whatever your warm red is color. Make it 2 parts that, 1 part Indian yellow. If you want, you could do that same thing we were doing here to just sort of desaturate, or dilute the mix. Do a little bit more of a lighter version there. I think this would look beautiful for like a Icelandic poppy maybe. So pretty. Okay, so that one is S red plus Indian yellow, and you can just write 2 to 1. Okay, next let's do more of like a cool pink. So we'll do Quinacridone and Winsor Lemon here. So we'll do another like, maybe more of like a 2 or 3 to 1. Let's see. Go push this one a little bit more towards the pink, but let's just warm it up a tiny bit by adding some Winsor Lemon. Just a tiny bit more warmth to that one. And dilute it there on the edges. Quinacridone Red and Winsor Lemon. So it just gives it a little more warmth. As you can see, a little bit more warm than this one. We'll say that's like a 3 to 1 ratio. Do 3 more mixes here. So let's have it more of like a something that would be great for like lilacs or violets. We'll do like purple, like a very vibrant purple color here. I'm gonna do Quinacridone again. I'll just keep mixing right here because we're gonna need all the space we can get here when the time comes. And a little bit of Ultramarine Blue. So we'll say this is like a 2 to 1, stronger on the Quinacridone side. Okay, so Quinacridone Red with Ultramarine Blue. I'd say that's like a 2 to 1. You can make it 3 to 1, doesn't really matter, but until your eye kind of sees something that feels like, okay, that feels like the color I'm going for. Okay, so let's do, how about some green? So let's come up with like a really bright spring green. I think a really great way to do that will be Winsor Lemon. So our cool yellow. Let's do our cool yellow and our cool blue. And I'm just going to show you something very quickly. We're going to talk about this more in a bit, but our cooler yellow, which is the yellow, sorry, I don't know if you can see this. Our cooler yellow is going to be the yellow green, the one that leans more towards yellow green. And our warmer blue, which is Winsor Blue, make sure it's in the frame. So our warmer blue, they're leaning towards each other on the color wheel. So when colors lean towards each other on the color wheel, when you're mixing them together, that is going to make a very pure color. I'm going to explain more of that later. But just remember, when colors that you're mixing together are leaning towards each other on the color wheel, it's going to be a purer color. When they're leaning away from each other, it's going to become a little bit more muted. So look how vibrant that color is. I think I'm going to mix it a little bit more, and I'll add a little bit more yellow to it. You can really push it either direction if you want it to be more of a blue-green or a yellow-green. There's so much nuance and theory to color. You could spend a whole lifetime just learning about just color. So that's Winsor Lemon and Winsor Blue. And that will say that's like a, I did kind of 1 to 1. You could definitely lean it more towards, like if I did a mix that was a little bit more heavy. Squeeze one more green mix in here. So yeah, there's one that's just a little bit more like a fresh, super bright green. Almost like a lime green. Okay, so that one's more like 1-to-1, and this is the same, but this is more 2-to-1. So same mix of colors, but different results just based on the ratios. Okay, so let's do, how about like an orange color? We'll do Sennelier Red. And then we'll do equal parts Indian yellow. It's nice when your paints have a lot of water in them already. I'm able to grab paint so much more quickly when these are already wet, and I can move a lot quicker. My process becomes a lot quicker. So there we go, our beautiful, a little bit more Sennelier Red. 50-50 mix. Okay. So there we have that. So you'll notice that this is the same mix as this one is, but this one is going to be more of like a 1-to-1. I probably should have done this one right next to that, but you get it. Love it. Okay. So this one is 1-to-1. So there we go. Those are like very, very vibrant, fresh, higher saturation mixes. Since I have a little bit of brush or paint here still for this color, I'm just going to layer it on as it's drying so we can see a darker value of it as well. And that one dried pretty light. Another thing I'll mention about color is that Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna, so they're right next to each other here, or I'm sorry, they're not next. Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Sienna, those are called granulating colors. So as they move through the water on the paper, that you're going to see like just these little bit more texture to them. They're kind of like the salt and pepper texture of watercolors. The rest of them are very smooth, but Burnt Sienna and Ultramarine have that granulating quality to them. So let's move into some more balanced, not quite as vibrant colors. And we're working our way down here. So let's do an olive green. Everybody needs an olive green. Everybody loves olive green. So we're going to do Indian yellow. And we'll do some Ultramarine Blue, which is a beautiful color just as it is. But I'm going to add just a tiny bit of Burnt Sienna to it. You get to decide how much you want. The more you add, the more desaturated it's going to become. I feel like mine needs a little bit more Indian yellow. Okay, so mess with your mix until you like how it looks. Then I'll dilute it a little bit. Okay, so that's Indian yellow plus Ultramarine Blue plus Burnt Sienna. So let's just say that's maybe like a 2-to-1. That's such a pretty color. That's the color people would pay for that tube of paint right there. But you can get it just with these mixes. And then you're more comfortable with mixing colors, so it's a huge win. Okay, let's do like an alternative to sap green or an alternative to like green gold, which I love. So just like a very balanced, kind of warm green. So let's do Winsor Lemon. Let's do Winsor Lemon with a little bit of Burnt Sienna. Winsor Lemon. Obviously we're gonna need a little bit of blue in there too. Okay, so some Winsor Lemon. Let's do some Ultramarine Blue. Tiny bit of burnt sienna. Mine needs a little bit more Winsor Lemon. It's leaning too much on the blue side and I don't want that. So this one looks like something that could be maybe like a daffodil stem. I don't know why that's the first thing I think of. Maybe like something a little bit more in the springtime. Maybe this makes more sense for spring, but I think this could work as well. I prefer a more natural balanced to desaturated palette myself. I like for it to be a little bit more grounded and muted. Okay, I love how that one looks. Okay, so let's do more of like a shadow green. So how about some Winsor Blue with some burnt sienna? Oops, wrong one. Okay, so this is gonna start taking down the intensity here. Actually, I'm gonna do raw sienna instead of burnt sienna. So here we go. Let's do Winsor Blue with some raw sienna. This is probably about a 2-to-1 ratio here. So that's beautiful for like shadowy areas, even for like a background. Love how that one turned out. Okay, so how about we do like another purple option, but maybe a little bit warmer. So how about we'll do some quinacridone. We'll add some ultramarine blue. Also, I keep forgetting to write down things as I go. Okay, so this one was Indian yellow. And I did ultramarine blue. Sorry, I did not Indian yellow. That was Winsor yellow. See, this is why you gotta write it immediately. So Winsor lemon, ultramarine blue, with a tiny bit of burnt sienna as well. So you just notice these are very similar mixes, but this one was Winsor lemon and this one was Indian yellow. 2 to 1. Over here we just did Winsor Blue with raw sienna. I would say you can push the balance each direction, but just start with a 1-to-1 ratio and then see how it goes from there. Okay, next is ultramarine blue a little bit. Let's add some ultramarine blue. So now we have basically the color, well, the exact same color that we had there, but I want to add a little bit of a grounding earth color to it. So let's add a tiny bit of raw sienna. So it's kind of this mauve color. My color didn't go as far as I should have made it go, so grabbing a little bit more, remixing, and just layering that on there. So go pretty light on the raw sienna there. It doesn't need a lot. That's such a pretty color. I love how that one looks. dilute it a little bit if you want to at the edge there. I always just like to see the blooms, kind of see the character of the watercolor, how it interacts with, you know, the mix in there. Always love to see those little like blooms, especially when a color has ultramarine blue in it, because like I said, the granulating effects in it makes it do really interesting things. So Quinacridone Red plus ultramarine blue plus raw sienna. We'll say that's 2 to 1. And how about we squeeze in another one? We don't have to squeeze, we have plenty of room. So let's do like a terracotta color. I think that would look really nice. So how about like burnt sienna? I'm gonna start mixing over here. Hopefully you can see okay. So burnt sienna. Indian yellow. We'll just do half and half here. I feel like I actually pushed it a little bit more on the burnt sienna side. So maybe like 2 to 1. Okay, so burnt sienna and Indian yellow, 2 to 1 ratio. And I feel like I just want to see, one more, one more green option. So let's see here. We've done Indian yellow. Okay, we're good. Okay, so now let's move over to the desaturated, kind of earthy, muted mixes. So let's start by doing kind of like a earthy, kind of grayish color. This is a very classic mix here, okay? One of the most iconic ones. I know John Singer Sargent, his palette had burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and you can kind of see it in all of his watercolor paintings. The mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna is incredible. So you can push it more towards brown. I'll start by having it more on the brown side. And then grab a little bit more of that ultramarine and then push it more towards that. And you'll see there's quite a bit of variety you can get with just those two colors. You can drop a little bit more burnt sienna in there. And again, I mentioned that these are the two granulating colors, so they're gonna have a little more texture. They got that little salty look to them. Love it. So pretty. Kind of let that bleed together, do something interesting. I remember watching this one Italian painter, and I remember he was giving like demonstrations, and he would say, add some paint here, let it do something, add some water here, like let it do something. And I like that phrase. Just let it do something, and that's what we're doing here. Let it do something, just mix together. Okay, scooch this over so you can see my mixing a little bit better. So that's our first color here. Let's do sort of like a dusty blue now. How about some Winsor Blue? Winsor Blue, which I love this color. This beautiful, cool color. And let's do some raw sienna. So we're gonna make these like blue jeans colored. Adding that earth shade just grounds it, makes it a little bit more natural, a little more earthy, takes down the intensity of it, okay? If I were to add a little bit more, what would that look like? So pretty. Here's a more a more diluted version of it with more water in my brush. Take down that intensity. That's a really great mix. So you can see I went from more on the cool side and then a little bit more raw sienna in there. Real quick, let's try burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. You can kind of figure out the ratios for yourself, but we'll just go ahead and say 1:1. I'll add an arrow that goes more ultramarine blue and an arrow that goes more burnt sienna on that side. Over here we had Winsor Blue with some raw sienna. Let's say it's a 2:1 ratio. But you get to play with that, see how that feels for you. How about a pink color? So let's do like a vintage antique kind of pink color, like a rose color, maybe something you'd see in like a Redoute painting. So we'll do quinacridone. Gotta keep scooching this over here. So quinacridone red, and we'll do some burnt sienna. About a 2:1 ratio. I feel like I actually went kind of 1:1 right there. So that one was quinacridone red with burnt sienna. That's 1:1 right there. And then if I pushed it more towards the quinacridone side, let's try that again. A little bit more pink there. I'm just gonna pull down that paint there, make it do something. That's the same, but it's more of a 2:1. Love it. You could also try mixing quinacridone with raw sienna. Let's see how that one looks. I like that mix even more. So there's some great like antique rose petal colors. So that one's quinacridone red with raw sienna, 1:1 ratio. And let's do, oh, I know, we need like some beige colors. So how about we do a little bit of like a raw sienna. Okay, so let's do sort of like a warm earthy color here. Sort of like a warm earthy beige color. So we'll do raw sienna with a little bit of extra warmth by adding some Indian yellow. It's beautiful, like a honey color. Add a little bit more raw sienna on there. Also, you could do this all day. Come up with so many mixes here. I'm starting to make them all small because I feel like I might want to create a couple extra ones. How about like we did a great like sort of slightly more desaturated color there. How about we do one that's even more of kind of like a smoky, almost like a shadowy gray. We can do like ultramarine blue. With some quinacridone red. And a little bit of burnt sienna. little more burnt sienna. Ooh, I like that actually. Okay, so I pushed it more towards the burnt sienna. That's a really cool color. Sorry, I pushed it more towards ultramarine. So that's ultramarine blue, quinacridone red, and burnt sienna. I'm going to say this is like a 3-2-1 ratio. Okay. And you can mess with that. Mess with those combos. Just play with color. It's so much fun. The best way to learn how to mix colors is to just play. What are we missing here? So we did like I feel like we need like a green in here. We haven't done any greens. These are pretty neutral, I would say, as far as greens go, but we could maybe even make it a little bit more of like a moss green. So maybe some ultramarine blue here with some raw sienna. I just completely grayed it out, just so you know. I'm gonna just paint that in there so you see. Do you ever want to just get that gray? It's very similar to that combo of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Kind of the same idea. So ultramarine blue and raw sienna, 1-to-1. Okay, but back to creating kind of a mossy green. So take back that blue, add a little bit more. And a little bit of burnt sienna. I really like this color. This is not the mossy green though. That is a really beautiful color. There's like another gorgeous like blue jean color. I feel like that'd be so pretty for like a vintage iris painting. Love it. Okay, so that's ultramarine blue plus raw sienna plus burnt sienna. And that was like definitely heavier on the ultramarine blue. So we'll say, again, I'm gonna say 3-2-1 here. So fun. Okay, I'm gonna have to just squeeze one more in here. Maybe I'll put it up here. Okay, so let's do some ultramarine blue. Do some Indian yellow. Mix those two together. Can't really see what I'm doing here, but I'm mixing them. Mix those two, and then let's add a little bit of, ooh, that looks so pretty as it is. I love it. It's a really great combo of colors. I'm just gonna add it right here because this is actually perfect for this area here because it is more of a balanced green. Okay, so let me write that real quick. So that's ultramarine blue and Indian yellow, 1-to-1. That's actually the perfect like sap green as compared to that one, I'd say, because it doesn't have that burnt sienna in there. I love it. Okay, so there we go. There's that one, and then let's add a tiny bit of an earth color to this one. So I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna, hopefully without doing too much. Definitely made it more of an earthy, pretty. I'll add this one here. So it's slightly more mossy. Actually, it could even look maybe more like kind of crispy, like a fall leaf or a leaf that I haven't watered from my houseplant. Okay, so that one there is ultramarine blue. Oh, I love those two colors together. Ultramarine blue, that was Indian yellow, and then raw sienna. That's a great combo. And the mix felt pretty balanced. We'll just say 1-to-1. Maybe a little bit lower on the raw sienna, but you play with it. See what you come up with. Okay, so the last part. Okay, so we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you just the mixes just from our 6 synthetic colors here. Okay, so let's just pull this out. And if this part goes over your head a little bit, don't even worry about it at all. Okay, so I'm just gonna talk really quickly about the color wheel here. So I have colors that are more, I'll show you. So Indian yellow, I'd put it right here, okay? Winsor lemon, I'd put right here. Red, my red color, Sennelier Red, is more on the orange side, whereas Quinacridone is more on the violet side. Ultramarine Blue, I'd put right there. Winsor Blue, I would put right there. Okay, so when we mix 2 colors together, for example, when we're mixing red and yellow to make kind of the orange, if you choose the colors that lean in towards each other, it's going to be more vibrant. When you choose the colors that are a little further apart from each other, they're going to start becoming opposites on the color wheel, and they are going to become more desaturated. I really hope that makes sense. That's a little bit hard to understand, and it's something that when I was getting started, that would have made no sense to me. So give yourself some grace if that's kind of confusing. I know it's a little bit heady. For example, over here though. So if I wanted to mix a green and I wanted it to be vibrant, I would choose these 2 greens, Winsor Lemon, Winsor Blue. It's going to be vibrant. We saw that happen over here. Winsor Lemon, Winsor Blue. It's much more vibrant. If you want something to be a little bit more desaturated, you would choose the colors that lean out a little bit from each other. And that's going to start leaning into complementary. When you mix complementary colors together, they cancel each other out. So for example, when we were mixing these 2 colors, Burnt Sienna and Ultramarine Blue, they kind of start to cancel each other out. Over here, Ultramarine Blue, Raw Sienna, opposites. They cancel each other out, okay? So I'm going to just show you an example of what I did in my sketchbook yesterday. I'm going to add it to the bottom of this sheet a little later, but I already have this painted, so I figured I'd just show it to you here. Okay, so here is like the clean wheel here. So Winsor Lemon, Winsor Blue together, Quinacridone Red with Ultramarine Blue. They lean towards each other on the color wheel chart. And then Sennelier Red with Indian Yellow. And then over here, I know it's kind of subtle, but just notice how these colors just feel like they're not packing the punch that these ones are. And so you get to decide which preference you have. Maybe you like them a little bit more bright. Maybe you like them a little bit more muted, but that's a really great tip there for just knowing how to mix colors that are a little bit softer, a little more muted versus vibrant. So that about sums it all up. So the last thing I would say is just don't worry about having every color. You can mix so much with such a small palette. I could get even more colors than this. I just kind of wanted to demonstrate for you what was possible, just kind of off the top of my head here. So the more you mix, the more you're going to come up with your own favorite colors. Have fun with it. Don't be intimidated. Color is fun. I'll see you guys very soon with another video. Take care. Bye-bye.